It's 3 a.m. and you're awake. Maybe your heart's beating a little quick. Maybe you're just awake. Leadership brings its own challenges. And you do what you shouldn't do. You turn to your phone, you pick it up, you look at the news, and you see that there is something going on that's going to directly affect you. How do you guys experience that? That was my morning. With the CrowdStrike disaster, we have offices around the world, and our cybersecurity team wasn't up yet, and I just happened to be. And it was breaking news. Australia was down. We have an office in Australia, so I reached out to our team there and just said, "Hey, what's going on? How exposed are we?" And wasn't getting a quick answer, so I reached out to our Europe team. "Hey, how exposed are we?" And I was just thinking, like, what's the issue? Is this a cyber attack? What's going on? We use CrowdStrike. We're using Microsoft Office. What does this mean for us? And so rather than spending more time preparing for this, I spent the next couple hours talking to our teams and just saying, hey, what's going on? Thankfully, we have a really good cybersecurity team, and it doesn't appear to be a cybersecurity attack right now. It seems to be a failed patch on your cybersecurity CrowdStrike, with a little bit of irony there. And our teams have been rebooting all of our servers and trying to get that going. But that is what it means to lead in an age of anxiety, right? We probably all experienced that. Our ministry here at Our Daily Bread Ministries is a global ministry. We have 700 employees, 300 of them whom are here in the United States. So most of our employees are outside the United States. And so there's usually something happening in the world that is impacting us, whether it's the civil war in Myanmar, where we have an office, it's the riots in Kenya, where we have an office, it's earthquakes in Taiwan, it's a hurricane in Jamaica, all places where we have offices. And there's something going on that's causing, at least me and often our teams, reason to have some anxiety. But as I was sharing this, a lot of people are kind of maybe getting your minds blown when I say we have 700 employees, because most of you think about us as a small devotional. Our ministry's mission is to make the life-changing wisdom of the Bible understandable and accessible to all. And to do that, we're trying to fuel a global Bible engagement movement. And as you can see here, this is just some of the things that we do around the world. So whether it's here in the States with God Hears Her, which is an outreach and ministry specifically targeting women in the ages of 30 to 45, or it's Reclaim Today, which is really targeting the next generation of Christian leaders and young people here in the States, or it's the Center for Bible Engagements that's doing research around the world, or our work that we're trying to do in Africa with literacy or pastoral training for reaching out to those who have little to no theological training. Most people don't realize that 95% of the pastors in the world have little to no theological training. We are in all those spaces. And so we're doing that because we desire to bring about a global Bible engagement movement. Because people who engage their Bible, research shows, grow spiritually. It is the one spiritual discipline that is predictive in spiritual growth. So that's what we're really passionate about. But I'm not here to talk about our ministry. I'm really here to talk about anxiety. The title, Age of Anxiety, actually comes from a W.H. Auden poem. I'm an English major, so I won't bore you with the poem. It is Auden's longest poem, and he wrote this right after World War II, which is really interesting. And there was this moment of rootlessness around the world. People were coming back from the war. People were moving all over the place. People were rebuilding after World War II. And Auden tapped into this sense of anxiety that was going on. And it's a long poem. It's his longest poem that most people don't read. But it's probably the most brilliant poem, as he just looks at the felt needs that people are experiencing. So what does a poem from 1946 have to do with us today? Well, we are living in an age of anxiety. And really, the anxiety age really started at the pre-industrial revolution. And people started coining this term anxiety to talk about what was happening as culture shifted. And people felt more anxious. You go through that through the post-industrial revolution and even greater anxiety. And you go into digital age and we see greater anxiety even more. And then we come into now today, this what I call the social media age. We are experiencing incredible anxiety, not just here in the United States, but wherever I go. This is a common conversation, whether it's people talk about with mental illness, mental challenges, or just anxiety and coping with this. Universities are trying to cope with this. Everyone's trying. How do we cope with this increasing anxiety? And I see a number of you nodding your head. Maybe you're experiencing it like me, because you've also had the sense of your own anxiety as a leader. I have my own anxiety, and then I have the anxiety that my team, my direct reports, as they are trying to lead. And then there's the anxiety of, for me, the ministry or the organization you lead. And sometimes you can feel it. You walk into a meeting and you can just feel the anxiety. Or when I'm not at my best, my anxiety gets thrown into the room in which I'm leading, right? Now, what's interesting is that this is really nothing really new. We've been seeing this for quite some time. Just here's some of the statistics on this. One, this just taken from the U.S. Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey in 2023. Almost a third of adults, 32% reported anxiety and depression symptoms. So just a third in this room. 49% of those adults were between the ages of 18 and 24. An estimated 31% of adults experience an anxiety disorder in their lifetimes. Or, if you want to look at some other data, Healthy Minds monthly poll, American Psychiatric Association, 32% of Americans rated their mental health as fair or poor at the end of 2022. And this is just coming out of COVID, but we've not seen the numbers change much since then. More than 1 in 4, 20%, or 26%, said they will have more stress in 2023. So this is a year old, and my sense is that's just accelerating, right? They're anticipating that the next year is going to be more stressful than the year they've just come out of. Or Health Resources and Services Administration, anxiety among children ages 3 to 17 increased 27% over the last 5 years. So it's not just the adults. We're talking about the youth movement. They are growing up in just an anxious world. By 2020, 3.6 million kids have been diagnosed with anxiety problems. So the reality is that we are living in an anxious culture. In fact, Shapira and others wrote this in Anxiety Culture, the New Global State of Human Affairs, explained the increase in general knowledge and technological capability leads to higher awareness of issues that in turn can cause anxiety to be a cultural norm. So it's not just something you're experiencing, the culture in which you are in is an anxious culture. They write, anxiety culture is much more than fear about threatening developments and potentially dangerous incidents. It has become characteristic of our dealing with the increasing problems and undefined solutions of a rapidly changing world. Let's let that sink in. Anxiousness is not about your own physiological response. It is the culture that you're living in. This is how we as a culture respond to a rapidly changing world. How's your anxiety? And we're asked to lead into this. We are asked to be leaders in this environment. Now, this isn't new. This isn't something that's just for us. And what I find interesting about this is that if you look at this, you can see that in the ancient world, you have similar situations. So I want to capture this briefly with you with a passage from Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 1 through 8. This is an anxious moment in the story of Israel. Then Moses went out and spoke these words to all Israel. I am now 120 years old, and I am no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. The Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you and will take possession of the land. Joshua also will cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said, and the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them what I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him, in the presence of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you must go with the people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. It's an anxious moment in Israel's history. It's a leadership transition. In the organization, when you go through a leadership transition, everybody's anxious. Our Daily Bread Ministries just went through that with me. Anxious for the leader, anxious for the organization. It's also a culture moment. There's a major culture transition. They're going to be going from being nomads for the last 40 years to being settlers. This is going to be a radical shift. Like, how do we do this? What does this look like? We've had 2 whole generations have grown up and have not ever experienced to actually live and settle in a place. What does that mean? They're going to face opposition. So think about it, whether it's competition or just an enemy or whatever. When you're walking into that, what is that? Your heart starts to beat faster. Like, what's this going to do? How's it going to go? What's going to be the challenges? Will I win? Will we come out? Will we be safe? They've experienced that same kind of fear a generation before, and they tried to go into the land, and they all came back fearful because there were giants in the land. So they know that they're going into a place that, hey, this is not an easy task. They're going into a new area. It's an uncertain future. They've never been here before. They don't know what it looks like. There's no drone footage to tell them what lies ahead. There's no satellite imagery to say, hey, what's the topography? There's no maps. We're walking into uncertain territory. And that's manifest in this passage because Moses says repeatedly, what? Don't be afraid. And why is he saying that? Because he's tapping into the mood in the camp. He knows everybody is fearful. Everyone is anxious. This is a real difficult moment in Israel's history. They're on the cusp. In fact, Mark Sayers, in his book, A Non-Anxious Presence, How a Changing and Complex World Will Create a Remnant of Renewed Christian Leaders, talks about this very idea. In fact, if you haven't read the book, I encourage you. It's written primarily for pastors, but I think every Christian reader should read that. We've discussed this as a team. And in this book, Mark Sayers talks about the passing era and the coming era. And in the middle of that is this gray zone. And that gray zone is the past is still starting to die away, but there's remnants of it, and the future is coming forward into it. And you don't know what the future is going to be and what will carry forward from the past into the future and what future will actually be like. And you're in this moment where there's a lot of confusion. Sayers' argument is that the world right now is living in a gray zone. So think about it. We are living in a rapidly deglobalizing world. This is a reversal of the last 70 years of Pax Americana, rapidly reshaping the world. And at the same time, we live in a more interconnected world than we've ever been before. How do you lead in that? We deal with this all the time in our ministry with offices around the world, deglobalizing, but we're also interconnected. Or we live in this world that desires authenticity more than ever, particularly in the Western context. We want authenticity, but we are living in an age of AI where everything is not authentic or it's artificial. And how do you live and just really know what is true and what isn't true? How does AI shape that? What does that mean? What's that new future going to look like? It's a gray zone. Or immigration and nationalism. We're living in a time of history where more people are moving across this world than ever before. And it's not just the American borders, it's happening in every country. And at the same time as people are moving across borders, borders are getting raised up in the rise of nationalism that's happening all across the world. Gray zone. This is a very new experience for us, and we see it convulsing the American political spectrum right now, all across the board. Where do people land on this issue? How do you resolve this issue? Or maybe more closer to home as business leader, the financial prosperity that we've experienced, even coming through COVID for most of us, but at the same time, great economic instability. And on top of that, government intervention like we've never seen before. What does that mean for the future? This is a gray zone. How do you lead in that? And how do you have, as Sayer says, a non-anxious presence so that you don't add to the anxiety that's already in the room? Well, I think there's two great quotes. I won't summarize the entire book that I think captures this. And this first one is this: our understanding of leadership rests on a set of cultural assumptions. These cultural assumptions are shifting as the world moves into a gray zone. Right? We are moving into this gray zone. And what that means for us is that this shifting culture that we're experiencing, these cultural assumptions we've had, is that the amount of information has never been greater. So historically, the leader has often been the repository of most of the information, and the leader can control what information is shared and what isn't. And you could be up talking right now, and you guys could be Googling me right now to make sure that I'm actually quoting Sayers correctly. Shift cultural assumptions. As leaders, you don't control the information like maybe people once did. The speed of change. Change is coming at us faster than ever. We have to respond to that. We can't keep up with that. What does that mean for our organizations? What does that mean for the people that we lead? What does that mean for us? We've never experienced the amount of change that a society has faced that we are right now, and it's happening quicker and quicker. People are starting to ask, can humans keep up with it? In fact, really, artificial intelligence is actually aiding in that. It's supposed to help us so we can handle the change, but all it's doing what? It's accelerating even greater. Or questioning of the facts. Everyone questions the facts. You can question anything. There's a whole different perspective on what's going on all the time. It's like facts no longer are paramount. In fact, what is paramount is narrative. What's the story? What story's winning? What story's losing? We can see this in the conspiracy theories that plague both the left and the right. And they trump facts all the time. And who gets the best story wins. How do you lead in that environment? Or there's just a huge shift in generational values. Do you realize that the 18 to 24-year-olds have more, your 18 to 24-year-olds have more in common with Singaporean 18 to 24-year-olds than with you? This is the first time in human history where an entire generation of digitally connected people have more in common with each other across national boundaries than with the previous generations. How do you manage that? And you guys have all experienced that working with Gen Z and late millennials. Or lastly, the transparency and authenticity, right? We want transparency. We want authenticity. But as a leader, you can't always be transparent. You just can't. You can't always share everything. But what does our culture want more than anything right now? We want transparency. So these cultural assumptions, these leadership values are shifting for us. So how do we lead in that? Sayers goes on to say this. He writes later in the book, the modern world promises progress and perfection without God. Leaders formed by the contemporary world can therefore presume that dependence on God is optional. For us as a Christian ministry, this is foundational to what we believe, and we're explicit about this. Some of you guys lead ministry, organizations or businesses that are Christian run, Christian believed, but Christian founded, but you can't be explicit. But still, the driving forces behind that are trying to help you kind of think through that. So how do you do that? How do you lead in the modern world? How do you make sure that best business practices don't trump reliance on God? How do you make sure that your desire for effectiveness doesn't replace your prayer life? How do you make sure that progress, which is good in its own right, isn't something that you just pursue for its own sake? Or how does technology and success insulate you from the harsh realities and give you false promise for the future? This is what it's like to lead in the modern world, right? These are the promises. Technology will solve everything. Progress is just getting better, and we know that that is not the truth. So how do we make sure we have a foundation that's built on God's word and guided by Christian principles? So I've been thinking about all this. I've been thinking about this in the context of me as a CEO for Christian ministry, about the leaders I serve, and I've been thinking about you in this context. So I'm going to share something with you that's I've shared this topic a number of times in the ministry and outside the ministry, but what I'm going to share with you right now is something new that I'm starting to work through. Because I've been thinking about, how do I make sure that I don't have a non-anxious presence? It's difficult, right? If I'm in the cultural soup and anxiety is the main flavor, if I have people who are dealing with anxiety on a personal level, and I have my own anxieties, how do I have a non-anxious presence and don't just say, don't be afraid? Right? So I've been thinking about where I tend to see anxiety creep up, and I've identified 4 areas. The first one is in leadership, my own leadership anxiety. Second one is organizational anxiety. The third is individual anxiety. And the fourth is decision-making anxiety. I think all of you have experienced at some point, maybe you're experiencing that right now. So here's this is a Harvard's 2x2. You've probably seen this before. So you want to get in the upper right-hand quadrant. In this one, you don't. So I want to talk about that. So if you look at this, typically when I walk into a leadership situation, if I'm experienced in it, I feel pretty comfortable. I've run into this situation before, I'm feeling comfortable. But if it's new or it's the first time, I'm concerned. It's happened to me a couple of times since I've taken over the role of CEO at Our Daily Bread Ministries, where I've walked into situations like, I haven't run into this problem before. Top to bottom, at the bottom, defined issue. Hey, it's really clear. You know what the issue is. You feel comfortable with it. You can claim, hey, that's the issue. I feel comfortable here. It feels less comfortable when it's emerging. Now, on the right-hand side is uncertainty. We've all experienced it. Okay, just not sure what to do with this. But anxiety creeps in when it's in the upper right-hand quadrant. What happened? Okay, it's there. Okay, it's back. Anxiety creeps in the upper right-hand quadrant. And knowing that when I am facing something that's an emerging problem and it's the first time, I know and I have to stop myself and say, this is going to be a place where I'm going to be anxious. This is going to be a place where my leaders with me are going to be anxious. This is where the ministry is going to be anxious. And just pausing and capturing this for myself and saying, here's the moment. Be prepared. So I just started training myself. First time, emerging problem. This is ripe for anxiety in all 3 quadrants. Myself, the team I lead, and the ministry as a whole. The second one is organizational anxiety, right? The status quo, that feels great. On the other side's change. Hey, change is going on. We all experience this. We know that. Top to bottom or bottom to top. Hey, when things are, you have your own choice. I always tell the teams, hey, everyone likes change when you're doing it to somebody else. Like I had the choice, I'm in control, but when no one likes change when it's being done to them. And so when the pressure mounts, when you no longer get to choose, and whether it's being done to you or just things are forcing the pressure, right? On the right-hand side, you got uncertainty, right? You can see, hey, you got the choice, but it's change, it's uncertain, it's uncomfortable. This is where the Israelites are going. They're choosing to go into the promised land, still uncertain. But man, when that pressure kicks in, anxiety. So I just pause and just ask myself organizationally, how much pressure is coming? Where's it coming from? Is it my own pressure that I'm creating as a CEO? Is it pressure on the outside? Is it things that we're doing ourselves to ourselves or things that we can't control? Let's recognize that and then say, hey, I'm just preparing myself. Moment of anxiety. Here it is. Third one, individual anxiety. You can kind of get the idea here. So, this when you have all the answers, things feel great. But when you have a lot of questions, don't know. And then when it's impersonal, when it's distant, hey, it doesn't really matter. My identity's not on the line. Things are great. But when it starts touching my identity, it gets personal. It starts invading my house. It invades my office. It affects me, right? Go from uncertainty, anxiety. So when it becomes personal, and when I have more questions than answers, I know my individual anxiety, what's going on in my own heart, it's going to grow. Lastly, the fourth one, decision-making anxiety. You guys have all experienced this. Hey, you have time, all the time in the world. There's nothing that's pressing on you. You can sit back and reflect on. You can sip your tea or whatever your favorite drink is and just relax, kick up your feet. You got the time in the world, no problem. When it's urgent, things starts pressing, right? And if it's low stakes, no problem. Right? We got time to think about that. We can take the risk, but man, when it's high stakes. So on that right-hand side, things are uncertain, but man, when it's high stakes and it's urgent and you've got to make a decision, right? So what does that mean for us? So I'd like to wrap up with this. How do we deal with uncertainty and how do we deal with anxiety? So we're Christian brothers and sisters in here. So I'm going to just speak to you plainly. So as brothers and sisters in Christ, we have some things we can do when we're dealing with uncertainty. One, wisdom from God, right? James chapter 1, verses 5 through 8 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Do you believe that? You're uncertain. The God of the universe says, he will give you wisdom. What you just got to do is ask. Do you stop in the middle of that anxious moment, that uncertain moment, and just pray? I mean, stop. Got to make a decision right now. No, I'm going to stop and I'm going to pray right now. I'm feeling this individual anxiety. I've got this leadership thing. I got to make a decision right now. No. God, give me wisdom. 2, counselors, right? Proverbs 11:14. For the lack of guidance, a nation fails, falls, but victory is won through many advisors. See, a lot of you are coaches in here and working with different ways, or you're, marketplace ministries, and you're trying to help chaplains. That's great. Do you gather, even those of you who are maybe coaching, do you have your own counselors? Or are you trying to do it on your own? And 3, sometimes you just need perspective. And Ecclesiastes just helps that, right? Just like, what's the big picture here, right? And Ecclesiastes 3:1-2 says, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot. Right? Really, the orders of our steps are already ordained for us, right? So what are we really anxious about? So sometimes I just need perspective. God, you really are the God of the universe. And it's easy to say this. You guys are all nodding your head, but right when you're in the moment, right, and you're in the upper right-hand quadrant, it's hard to catch yourself. So with that, I'd like to close with this. Here's what I have been working on with my own personal anxiety, because I struggle with anxiety. And I want to be a non-anxious presence. So here's 5 things that I do purposely on a regular basis. So 1, just like I did here, I work really hard to recognize the anxiety. My wife says this is an area that I'm growing in because it's difficult. She says, you're anxious. No, I'm not. She's like, really? just recognizing it. And so that's why that grid has been helpful for me, is like say, hey, this, maybe I don't feel anxious right now, but like this is the seed bed for anxiety right here. 2, prayer and intimacy. Really spending time with God. It's so easy for me to get so busy to not do this. And I'll be honest with you right now, I have not been as prayerful and intimate with God as I've been these last 2 weeks. Because I've just let the busyness of board meetings and coming up executive training our retreat coming together, I've let that dominate more than my intimacy with God. So I am ripe right now for anxiousness in my life. Long walks. I go for a lot of long walks, like miles. Like my wife will know, like, hey, I'm going to go because I'm feeling, and I just go 7, 8, 9 miles, 10 miles, just go and just walk. Oftentimes I'm praying. I just need to go. I need to move. I need to exercise. I just need to just clear my mind and just go. And there's all kinds of reasons why not to do it. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's too windy, no, I have to go. Bundle up, strip down, whatever I have to do so that I can just do that. 4th, breathing. Just in, out. The Marines actually a number of special forces use this, where it's called box breathing, right? Where you breathe in, you hold it, and then you breathe out and you hold it and you just do this. And it's amazing what that will do. And when you're in the upper right-hand quadrant, to ground you and just slow you down. And then lastly, just grounding techniques. Just reminding myself. So I'm going to be really vulnerable here. This is what I'll do. Just right here. Get myself back in the moment. Slow myself down. I'm a physical being. Get out of my head and just not relax. Just ground myself. I'm here, right here. So I'll close with this. You can't end the talk in a Christian setting about anxiety without referencing Philippians chapter 4, 6 through 7, right? But I want to give this to you not as a weight, because oftentimes that's what we receive this as, particularly if we're anxious. Don't be anxious about anything, but I'm anxious. I'm already failing. I'm just another thing to be anxious about, right? Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. The reason why Paul ends the Philippian letter is the same reason why Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 1 references, do not be afraid. Because we are experiencing anxiety and we are experiencing fear. This isn't a verse to condemn. It's a verse to gently encourage. Yeah, you're feeling anxious right now. Don't stay there. You need you. Your team needs you. And the organization you serve needs you. And I'll end with this last thought about leadership. What they say is that leadership is not about you. That's the rule number 1. Rule number 2, it's all about you. And living in that tension and not allowing anxiety to be the thing that gets in the way of those 2 rules allows us to be the godlike leaders that God wants us to be. So that's my prayer for you. It's been part of my journey. Would love to talk more with you about that and share things that I've been learning. Thanks for having me here. And I think that I'm supposed to share my testimony briefly, so I'll do that because I think I've gone over a little bit here. My parents were led to the Lord by Southern Baptist missionaries when I was 4 years old in Taiwan. My dad was in the military, so we were over there. We were the last dependent family into Taiwan before the one China rule started kicking everybody out of Taiwan. And so we're there. And so I have very have small glimpses of what life was like with a family of alcoholics who were burning their way to hell as fast as they can. Um, and thankfully, I don't have too many of those memories, and I've grown up in a Christ-like home. My parents had a radical transformation. I mean, just they were one way, and then they were someone different. Particularly my mom, who was a 2-pack a day smoker, alcoholic, and she stopped everything. She has her own struggles still to this day, but those areas God just delivered her from. I was able to grow up in a Christian home. We lived all over the world because my parents were in the military. And I ended up in Puyallup, Washington, when my dad retired, and I went to Corbin University in Salem, Oregon. It's a Christian university for my undergraduate years, where I met my wife. And I chose to go to a Christian university because I knew I wasn't ready to go to a secular university if I wanted to build into my faith. I just knew, even though I desired the prestige of a bigger university, New York University, St. Andrews were places that I aspired to. I knew I needed a grounding in my faith. And God was gracious in giving me a wonderful college experience, and met my wife there. I went on to graduate school, and after graduate school, came back and was able to teach in the Salem area for 6 years in public high school. And then I came back and started working at Corbin University as a professor, and then I became chancellor or provost there, and then later moved to Indiana Wesleyan University, where I became chancellor. And during that time period, where I had no desire to be a leader, had no aspirations to be a leader, God thrust me at a young age into leadership responsibilities at 36, and I was provost of the university. And it was a major challenge, and I had to confront my own anxiety in a real way. And at 38, I came close to having a mental breakdown because I didn't know how to deal with my own anxiety and the leadership challenges and the opportunities that God was putting in front of me. So I went to counselor, and he confronted me with my own issues and really asked me a question. Maybe, Matt, you really aren't cut out for administrative leadership. And I had to wrestle with that for about 6 months and ask myself, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I'm asked to do something else. Won't bore you with the whole long process, but it was a time of really confronting myself and really having God do some work in me. And really, a lot of the problems that I was facing at 38 were areas of judgment, of immaturity, and then some things that were just first-time situations being thrust into leadership that were just bigger than me, and I just had to learn how to deal with them. By God's grace, he prepared me to be able to do that, and today I'm able to serve as the CEO of Our Daily Bread Ministries. But I go back to that day, 38 years old, that 6-month period, often in my leadership, because that's probably more than any other time where God taught me and prepared me to be the leader I am today. Because I had to really do some deep soul searching and really come to recognize, man, you don't have it all together as much as you want to. So today I stand before you as someone who has confronted his own anxieties and dealing with that, but also thankful that God has radically transformed me and has given me the opportunity to do some things that are much bigger than I ever dreamed of as a young man. And it's a pleasure to serve here at the ministry, and it's a pleasure to be here in Grand Rapids. So thank you for having me.